Apparently, there's a way of turning dirt into a perfectly round and shiny bowl, and they can even sell for hundreds of dollars. When I first saw this, I thought, this can't be real, like this has to be a scam. But I did some digging and it is a real thing. It's called Dorodango, and it's a hobby that once swept across the whole of Japan. Which is great and all, but it didn't answer any of my questions, like how is it so round? How do you get this mirror polish? How does this stay together? How does it not completely crumble? Do I have to use a special dirt? What are the tools that they needed to use? Can you really sell them for hundreds of dollars? Is the world really round? So to answer all these questions, I'm gonna try and make one myself. The first thing to do was to go and collect some dirt, which sounds easy until you realize that I live in the middle of a concrete jungle and that all the dirt is up here at the top of a huge freaking hill. And if we take a look at the weather station, it is extremely hot and I should pay attention to health conditions. So you'd have to be an idiot to try and climb up a whole mountain in this heat.
I am really regretting this right now. Anyways, my first question was, do I have to use a special kind of dirt for this? But apparently I don't, so I'm just gonna pick up the first dirt that I see and hopefully it all works out. Ugh. I'm tired, I'm drenched in sweat, but we found dirt.
Once my bag was full of Hong Kong's most average dirt, I made my way back down the hill. Now that I had it all in front of me, I was really struggling to see how this messy pile of dirt and rubbish was going to turn into something so beautiful. But I got to work, and the first step of the process is to sieve through the whole bag, because we want to separate all the rubbish and we only want to work with the finest particles of dirt. And just for fun, I wanted to see how long it would take for this whole dirt pile to dry up. I don't want to ever have to do that again. So I've been through 2 rounds of sifting, and this is the good stuff, and this is all the bad stuff. I was hoping to get a lot more dirt from that. I wasn't too happy because I only had enough dirt for 1 try. Anyways, the next step was to mix the fine dirt with water so that I could create a bowl. If I didn't use enough water, the dirt wouldn't stick together and the bowl could just break apart at any time. And if I used too much water, the whole thing might be too squishy and I might have to wait like, days again for the whole thing to dry out so that I could start all over. I have no idea what I'm doing here. Fortunately, I found a recipe online which gave me the exact quantities of dirt and water I should use. Unfortunately, I don't have weighing scales. But neither did the Japanese kids who used to be obsessed with making these Dorodangos. So just like them, I'm gonna try and just go off vibes. I started adding water to the dirt, and I did this so slowly because there was no way I was gonna wait for this whole thing to dry so that I could start again. So every time I only added a bit and I really mixed it all together. And if it still looked dry, only then did I add some more water. And you know that you've reached the right mixture of dirt and water when the consistency of the whole mix starts feeling like dough. And it took me about half an hour of messing around to kind of get to that point. But whatever you do, don't use up all that fine dirt because we're going to need to keep some. But more on that later. Once I reached that dough-like consistency, I wanted to really make sure I only had mud in this bowl. So I squished everything together just in case there was any air trapped inside. And once I did that, I started shaping it into a bowl. Now I thought that rolling it on the table and doing like a whole bunch of extra stuff would help, but in the end, the best result I got was just shaping the bowl by hand. And when I finished, I was just thinking to myself, like, how is this squishy thing going to keep its shape when I'm trying to turn it into a perfect bowl? And how is this muddy mess going to turn into like, a mirror polished finish? I mean, I was still so skeptical at this point. But I left it to dry overnight to see if anything would change. After waiting a whole day, the dirt bowl was still not dry. So in the meantime, I decided to go and collect the tools necessary to turn this horrible muddy bowl into this polished masterpiece. Now, there were 2 ways I could do this. I could go down the traditional route and only use the super basic tools that were available to Japanese kids like 100 years ago, or I could use better and faster modern tools that are purposely built for shaping and polishing. I did not want to spend the next 10 years trying to polish this bowl, so my vote was the modern tools. But I guess that you probably wanted to see me go down the traditional route. So I prepared this completely unbiased spinning wheel, and I just left it up to chance. God damn it! So that meant the only tool I could use was a glass jar. I mean, I was really struggling to believe that this was going to work. But one quick pasta later, and the tool was ready. And you can serve your pasta with a side of shiny balls, because Dorodango's literal translation means a mud dumpling. Although, taste-wise, the little bowl had finally dried. So I started shaping it. And because I made the little bowl by hand, it had all these high and low spots. So the idea here was to rub the glass container around the dirt bowl so that it would grind away all the high spots and turn our little bowl into a perfect sphere. Now, that did sound like a good plan, but it also sounded pretty brutal. And I was still scared that if I pressed down too hard, my little bowl could crack or completely disintegrate. So I wet the surface of the bowl and I cautiously started grinding away, but I wasn't getting too far. So instead of rubbing the glass against the bowl, I put the glass down and started pressing the bowl against it. Using this technique, I was able to grind the bowl down with a lot more strength, and I was really surprised about how strong that little bowl had become. Part of me was saying, why don't you do a drop test? Like, let's see how hard this thing really is. But another part of me was saying, if you do a drop test and this breaks. Luckily for me and for the dirt bowl, my common sense prevailed. But if this video gets like 1 trillion likes, I'll come back and I'll do a drop test. So I kept on adding water to the bowl and I kept on grinding, and the bowl was getting pretty damn round. And a good way to check whether the bowl was perfectly round was whether there was a gap between the glass and the bowl. Because if there was no gap, then that section of the bowl was perfectly spherical and you could move on to the next section. Although I was doing pretty well, I had to go back to that original softer technique to get that perfectly round shape. And I used that really fine dirt that had collected on the rim of the glass to fill in any of the low spots. Although this did take a few hours, repeating the same simple action over and over again was really meditative, and the sound of the glass against the dirt was just so satisfying. For the final challenge, it was time to polish the bowl. And again, the only thing I had to do this was a glass container. I mean, I did not see how this was going to work, but I'd been skeptical about the whole process since the start, and it's all worked out. So I decided to trust the process one last time. The idea is that you want to build up a few layers of really fine dirt on the surface of the bowl, and this fine dirt covers all the imperfections underneath it, and by some magic, gets polished. So I grabbed the fine dirt that I'd put aside in the beginning, and I just covered the bowl in it. Then I wet the container and started rubbing it against the bowl to really spread out that fine dirt evenly, which gave me this really tacky and matte surface. I kept on rubbing until that layer had dried up, and then I started the whole process over again. I kept on adding layers, and it was all going well until all of a sudden I got this rough patch. So I just added fine dirt and water to that patch and started working on the area until it was smooth again. But then when I went back to covering the whole bowl, another rough patch appeared, and this just kept on happening. But I think I figured out what was happening. I started to press and rub the dirt into the bowl by hand before I would rub it in with the glass. This made sure that only the finest of the fine dirt particles were left on the bowl, and that there weren't any larger particles left that could scratch the surface. So that made me very happy. But not as happy as if you would subscribe to my channel. After building up a few layers of this super fine dirt, I cleared everything up so that I was ready for the polishing. And all I had to do was dip the rim of the glass into some oil to reduce the friction and just rub it against the bowl. And I could hardly believe my eyes. I mean, just look at this thing. I mean, you can see the reflection of my light in it. I can see the reflection of myself in it. I mean, this is not real. This is just dirt. I mean, I can still hardly believe it. That is silly. I couldn't believe it. I mean, all of that using a simple glass jar. That's it for this one. If you enjoyed it and you want to watch more, go check out the other videos on my channel where I test out and learn new things. And I'll see you in the next one. Ciao!